Leah Porter stared at the handwritten note pushed across the courthouse desk, 2 sentences that stripped away what little remained of her life. Property foreclosed. Vacate premises by sundown. The bank manager wouldn't meet her eyes, his attention suddenly absorbed by shuffling papers that didn't need organizing. Her late father's small Illinois farm, the only home she'd ever known, was gone. With it vanished her last connection to family, security, and belonging. The drought of 1934 had taken everything else, the crops, the livestock, and eventually her father's will to live after her mother's passing the previous winter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The courthouse door felt impossibly heavy as Leah pushed into the dusty street of Oak Ridge. August heat shimmered off the parched ground, the sun's merciless glare mirroring the indifference of the townsfolk who passed without acknowledging her. Nobody wanted to look too closely at failure during these hard times, as if poverty might be contagious. At 26, Leah Porter had never learned to speak. Not couldn't, but hadn't. The fever that nearly claimed her at age 4 had left her. Vocal cords damaged but functional, yet the trauma had silenced her in ways medicine couldn't explain. Her parents had eventually stopped expecting words, creating a system of gestures and expressions that served well enough on their isolated farm. But in town, her silence made people uncomfortable. They filled it with their own assumptions. Simple-minded, disturbed, possibly dangerous. The whispers followed her like shadows as she walked toward the general store, where her few possessions waited in a battered suitcase borrowed from Mrs. Wilson, the elderly neighbor who'd been kind but couldn't offer shelter. Miss Porter. Sheriff. Taylor stepped into her path, his expression a practiced blend of official concern and personal detachment. Heard about the farm? Got any people you can wire? Anyone at all? Leah shook her head. There was no one. The Great War had taken her only uncle, and her mother's family back east had disowned her for marrying a dirt farmer. The sheriff sighed, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. Train to Chicago leaves at 4. Might find work in the factories. There. He pressed a ticket into her hand. Town took up a collection. It's one way, mind you. Charity. The final humiliation. Leah's fingers closed around the ticket, her throat tight with unspoken words of both gratitude and resentment. She nodded once, the only acknowledgement she could offer. Best hurry, the sheriff added, already turning away. Station master won't hold the train, and there's nothing for you here anymore. Nothing for you here anymore. The words echoed in her mind as she collected her suitcase from the store's back room. Inside were her mother's silver brush, 3 dresses, her father's, pocket watch, and a small tin of hard candies her mother had always kept for special occasions. 26 years of life reduced to items that fit in a single case. The walk to the train station stretched only 6 blocks, but each step felt leaden. Leah had never left Oak Ridge. Chicago existed as a mythical place in newspaper stories, massive, indifferent, and filled with dangers her sheltered life hadn't prepared her for. How would she survive where spoken words were the currency of daily existence? Halfway to the station, the skies darkened suddenly. Not with rain. There hadn't been proper rain in 18 months, but with the rolling brown clouds of another. Dust storms sweeping in from the west. People hurried for shelter, doors slamming as businesses closed against the approaching wall of dirt. Leah quickened her pace, clutching her suitcase tighter. The station platform stood exposed and empty when she arrived. The station master was locking the office door, keys jangling as he rushed to finish before the dust arrived. "Train's delayed," he shouted over the rising wind. "Storms cross the tracks 10 miles west. Won't move till it clears. Could be hours." He gestured toward the shuttered waiting room. Can't leave it open. Health regulations. Try the hotel if you got money, or the church basement if you don't. He hurried away, without waiting for a response he likely knew wouldn't come. Leah stood alone on the platform as the first stinging particles of dust swept across her face. The hotel was out of the question. The ticket had consumed whatever community goodwill existed for her. The church seemed equally impossible. The minister had made his opinions clear about her father's absence from Sunday services. The approaching roar of the dust storm grew louder as visibility diminished. Leah tucked herself against the station wall, using her body to shield the suitcase. She'd endured dust storms before, but always inside, windows sealed with damp towels, her father's sturdy walls between her and the suffocating cloud. Through the thickening haze, a vehicle's headlamps appeared on the road adjacent to the station, a truck moving slowly in the deteriorating conditions. It stopped near the platform, its engine grumbling beneath the storm's howl. The passenger door swung open. "Get in," a deep voice commanded, "unless you're aiming to choke to death out here." Leah hesitated. Strangers were complications, interactions she couldn't navigate without words. But as the dust thickened around her, survival instinct overrode caution. She grabbed her suitcase and stumbled toward the truck, nearly blind in the swirling dirt. A strong hand grasped her arm, helping her climb inside. The door slammed shut, immediately muffling the storm's fury. Leah blinked dust from her eyes, finally able to see her rescuer, a man perhaps in his late 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His expression was neither friendly nor hostile, merely assessing. "Heading somewhere or running from something?" he asked, putting the truck in gear. "Not that it matters much today. Storm's got other plans for everybody." When she didn't answer, his gaze sharpened. Recognition dawned in his expression. "You're Thomas Porter's daughter, the one who doesn't. And talk." Leah nodded, bracing herself for the usual awkward pity or dismissal. "I'm Jackson Reed," he said instead, focusing on navigating through the near-zero visibility. "Got a place northwest of town. Was supposed to be picking up fence supplies, but that'll have to wait." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if rescuing dust-covered women from train stations was routine. "Bank took your farm today," he continued. "News. Travels fast in Oak Ridge. Guess that ticket's for Chicago," another nod. "Heading to a city you've never seen, with no job or connections, in the middle of the worst economic collapse in history." He didn't phrase it as a question, but the assessment hung between them. Leah stared straight ahead. Her situation didn't need his evaluation to confirm its hopelessness. "Got a proposition for you," Reed said after a moment. "My housekeeper died last month. Influenza. Place is falling apart without her. Need someone to cook, clean, manage things. Inside while I handle the ranch." Leah turned to study him properly for the first time. Jackson Reed's name was familiar, one of the few ranchers still holding on despite the drought, his cattle operations smaller but apparently more resilient than most. His ranch lay isolated in the foothills 20 miles outside town, where groundwater ran deeper and grass somehow survived. "Spare room, regular meals, fair wage," he continued when she didn't respond. "Better odds than whatever Chicago's offering someone with your circumstances." The unspoken reality hung between them. Who would hire a woman who couldn't or wouldn't speak? Factory foremen wouldn't accommodate her silence. They'd simply choose from the hundreds of desperate others willing to work for pennies. "Won't pretend it's charity," Reed added, his tone hardening slightly. "I need help, not another burden. You'd earn your keep, or we'd part ways. Simple as that." The dust storm enveloped the truck completely now, forcing Reed to stop at the roadside. In the confined space, Leah could smell leather and hay on his clothes, mixed with the ever-present dust that defined their existence these days. She reached for the small notepad and pencil in her dress pocket, her usual method of communication. when gestures wouldn't suffice. "Why me?" she wrote, holding it where he could see. Reed's expression remained unchanged. "Because Thomas Porter was the most honest man I ever knew, even when the drought broke him. Figure his daughter might have some of that same quality." He paused. "And because everybody deserves one more chance before they're forced to give up everything they know." Licia considered the thundering train rushing toward Chicago, carrying her to an anonymous existence among millions who wouldn't care if she spoke or not, because they wouldn't see her at all. Then she thought of familiar land, work she understood, and the possibility, however small, of building something from the ruins of her life. She didn't need her notepad for the response. She simply nodded. "Settled then," Reed said, as if they'd just concluded an ordinary business transaction. "Storm should pass by nightfall. We'll head to the ranch after." As they sat in silence, waiting for the howling dust to exhaust itself, Leah watched Jackson Reed's profile against the dim light filtering through the storm. His expression revealed nothing of his thoughts, but she recognized in his stillness something she understood intimately: the practiced solitude of someone accustomed to facing the world alone. What Leah couldn't possibly know was that Jackson Reed carried secrets and wounds far deeper than her own, or that the silent understanding forming between them in that dust-shrouded truck would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nightfall brought merciful relief from the dust storm. The air remained thick with suspended particles that caught the truck's headlights like fireflies, but visibility had improved enough to resume their journey. Jackson Reed drove with the focused concentration of a man accustomed to navigating hazards both seen and unseen. "5 more miles," he said, breaking the hour-long silence between them. "Creek's running low but still flowing on my property. We'll get you cleaned up when we arrive." Leah watched the barren landscape gradually transform as they left the flatlands. Here, gentle slopes rose toward distant hills, and occasional trees, gnarled but alive, punctuated the horizon. Even in drought, this land retained a stubborn vitality, absent from the abandoned farms they passed. The truck turned onto a rutted drive marked by a weathered sign, Raven Creek Ranch. A quarter-mile later, a 2-story farmhouse appeared, its sturdy stone foundation supporting a wooden structure with a wide porch and multiple chimneys. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: barn, workshop, smokehouse, forming a self-contained world separate from Oak Ridge's slow collapse. "Home," Jackson announced without emotion as he parked beside the house. Not what it was before the drought, but still standing. Inside, the ranch house revealed both neglect and underlying order. Dishes were stacked unwashed, dust gathered in corners, and papers cluttered every surface, yet the floors had been recently swept, and the furniture positioned with practical efficiency. This was a working home, not a showpiece. "Martha's room," Jackson said, opening a door off the kitchen to reveal a small but comfortable bedroom. "She was here 30 years, kept everything running while I handled the outside work." His voice held no sentimentality, just acknowledgement of facts. "Bathrooms down the hall, kitchen's yours to organize however suits you." He showed her the pantry, surprisingly well stocked compared to most homes these days, and indicated a desk in the corner with the ranch's account books. "Martha handled the numbers," he explained. "Can you manage that part?" Leah nodded. Numbers had always made more sense to her than words. Her father had taught her farm accounting early, letting her track their dwindling fortunes during the drought years. "Good," Jackson checked his pocket watch. "Almost 9. I rise at 4:30, coffee at 5. Whatever schedule you set for the meals is fine." He paused, studying her with that same assessing gaze from the truck. "Any questions?" Leah reached for her notepad, considering what she needed to know immediately versus what could wait. She wrote carefully, then showed him the page. "What happened to your wife?" The question was boldly direct, but essential. If she was replacing a housekeeper, not a wife, she needed clarity about the household's dynamics. Something flickered across Jackson's face, surprise perhaps at her forthrightness. "Never married," he answered flatly. "Ranch was my father's, then mine after the war took him. Martha came with the property, worked for the Reed men since my grandfather's time." He turned toward the hallway. "My room's upstairs. I won't disturb your work if you don't disturb mine." With that, he left her to settle in, his footsteps heavy on the wooden staircase. Alone in Martha's room, Leah unpacked her meager possessions, the familiar routine providing comfort amid strangeness. She changed into her nightgown, then impulsively opened the window. Fresh air, a luxury during dust storms, flowed in, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Sleep came unexpectedly easily, deep and dreamless. Dawn arrived with roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Leah woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the unfamiliar ceiling above her snapped yesterday's events into focus. Checking her father's pocket watch, she saw it was already 4:45. Jackson would expect coffee in 15 minutes. She dressed hurriedly, splashed water on her face from the basin, and hurried to the kitchen. The stove was already lit, Jackson's doing, she presumed, and she quickly located coffee and the percolator. By 5 o'clock, she had coffee poured and bacon frying in the cast-iron skillet. Jackson appeared precisely at 5, hat already on, boots muddy from early chores. He nodded approval at the coffee, but seemed surprised by the bacon and eggs she slid before him. "Didn't expect breakfast," he said, though he sat and began eating without hesitation. "Coffee's usually enough." Leah shrugged slightly. If she was. To earn her keep, half measures wouldn't suffice. She took out her notepad while he ate. "Daily expectations?" she wrote. "General upkeep inside," Jackson replied between bites. "Cooking, cleaning, laundry. Ranch books need organizing." Martha was slipping toward the end. He glanced at her appraisingly. "Garden's gone fallow. Could use attention if you've farming experience." Leah nodded. Gardens, she understood. "Property includes 4 hands," Jackson continued. "They've got a bunkhouse by the north pasture, but take lunch here most days. Simple fare's fine. They're not particular." When he finished eating, Jackson stood and reached into his pocket, extracting a small brass key. "Martha's key to the household safe," he explained, placing it on the table. "Money for supplies, emergencies. Records inside should match the account books." He paused, his grey eyes holding hers. "Trust works both ways here. I expect honesty. You'll get the same." With that he departed, leaving his empty plate and the weighty key that represented more responsibility than Leah had anticipated on her first morning. The following days established a rhythm unlike anything from her previous life. Jackson left after breakfast, returning briefly at noon to eat with the ranch hands, 4 weathered men of varying ages who treated Leah with awkward courtesy, communicating mostly through nods and gestures once they understood her silence. Eldest hand, Walter Miller, white-haired but straight-backed despite his 70 years, occasionally translated his companion's mumbled requests into clear statements, as if he alone understood the value of direct communication with her. "Carson wants to know if you need anything from town tomorrow," he'd say, or Denton's asking if there might be pie sometime this week. These small considerations formed bridges across her silence, allowing her to function within the ranch's ecosystem. By her 5th day, Leah had transformed the kitchen's chaos into ordered efficiency, excavated the garden from its weedy abandonment, and begun untangling the neglected account books. The work exhausted her, but differently than farm labor had, this was purposeful fatigue, building something rather than desperately maintaining a dying enterprise. On her 7th morning at Raven Creek, Leah rose earlier than usual, determined to inventory the root cellar before breakfast. Jackson had mentioned dwindling preserves, and she needed to assess winter preparations. Lamp in hand, she descended the outdoor steps into the cool darkness beneath the house. The cellar's shelves stood disappointingly bare compared to her mother's always full pantry in better years. Dust-covered jars dated from 2 harvests prior, before Martha's illness had prevented proper canning. Leah made mental notes about necessary supplies, calculating what remained of summer for preserving whatever the garden might yield. So absorbed was she in these practical considerations that the sound didn't register immediately, a soft whimpering coming from behind a stack of empty crates in the cellar's darkest corner. Raising her lamp higher, Leah moved cautiously toward the noise. The light revealed a small, trembling figure huddled against the stone wall, a child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with tangled brown hair and eyes wide with fear. A girl, filthy, underfed, and clearly terrified. Leah set her lamp down slowly, keeping distance between them to avoid frightening the child further. The girl clutched something protectively against her chest, a small cloth doll, one arm missing, its fabric face worn nearly featureless from handling. Recognition dawned suddenly. Leah had seen this child before, months ago in Oak Ridge, the Miller girl, Walter's granddaughter. The family had lost their farm adjacent to her father's property early in the drought. Rumors had circulated about the child's mother abandoning the family, the father turning to drink. Walter had been raising her until his health failed, necessitating his move to the ranch bunkhouse where no children were permitted. Leah reached for her notepad, but stopped herself. This child needed immediate reassurance, not written words. She might not be able to read. Instead, she removed the apple she'd tucked in her apron pocket for a mid-morning snack and offered it with an open palm. The universal peace offering to a hungry child. The girl stared at the fruit, hunger warring with suspicion in her hollow-cheeked face. Slowly, one dirty hand reached out, snatching the apple before retreating back to the wall. She bit into it with the desperate efficiency of the truly hungry, never taking her eyes off Leah. The parallels between them struck Leah with sudden clarity. 2 silent females seeking refuge in a world that had stripped away their security. One lacking voice, the other lacking everything else. Footsteps on the cellar stairs broke the moment. Jackson's boots appeared, then his legs, then his towering presence filling the small space. "Breakfast ready?" he began, then stopped abruptly. As he spotted the tableau before him, Leah crouched on the dirt floor, the child pressed against the wall, apple clutched in mid-bite. "Alice Miller," he said, recognition immediate. "Walter's been half crazy looking for you these past 2 days." The girl, Alice, shrank further into herself, eyes darting between the adults as if calculating escape routes. "What are you doing?" "Here, child?" Jackson asked, his tone gentler than Leah had heard him use before. Alice remained silent, mirroring Leah's own muteness, though clearly by choice rather than necessity. What happened next would determine many things about Jackson. Reed's character, about Leah's place at Raven Creek, and about whether second chances truly existed for those society had deemed voiceless and without worth. Jackson crouched slowly, bringing himself to eye level with Alice. The movement was deliberate, reducing his intimidating height to something less threatening. Leah noted how his expression softened, creases around his eyes, revealing a gentleness she hadn't witnessed before. "Walter's been riding himself ragged searching for you," he said quietly. "Thought you might have tried to walk back to your old farm." Alice clutched her doll tighter but remained silent. "Your grandpa's getting too old to spend nights in the saddle," Jackson continued. "He needs to know you're safe." The girl's eyes darted to Leah, then back to Jackson. She swallowed hard, still chewing the last of the apple. "They want to send me away," she whispered finally, her voice hoarse from Dessous. "Heard them talking. Orphanage in Denver." Jackson exhaled slowly. "Who said that, Alice?" "Sheriff and Reverend Patterson. came to the bunkhouse when Grandpa was sleeping. Her thin shoulders hunched protectively. Said it wasn't proper for a child to live with ranch hands. Said I needed feminine guidance and schooling. Leah's chest tightened at the familiar cruelty disguised as concern. How often had proper and appropriate been weaponized against those who didn't fit neatly into society's expectations? Jackson glanced at Leah, a silent question in his eyes. She reached for her notepad, writing quickly, "How long have you been hiding?" 3 days, Alice answered after Jackson read the question aloud. "Grandpa thinks I ran off, but I was watching, so I'm looking." Tears welled in her eyes. Didn't want him to find me, 'cause then they'd take me. The child's logic was heartbreaking. Better to let her grandfather suffer worry than face separation. From the only family she had left, Jackson stood abruptly. "We need to get Walter," he said. "End this nonsense right now." Leah shook her head emphatically, gesturing for her notepad again. "Feed her first. Bath. Clean clothes. Then talk." The practical compassion in her suggestion made Jackson pause, reassessing the filthy, exhausted child before them. "You're right," he conceded. "Alice needs looking after before anything else." He addressed the girl directly. "Miss, Porter's going to help you get cleaned up and fed. Then we'll fetch your grandpa. No one's sending you anywhere today. Understand?" Alice studied them both skeptically. The wariness of a child who'd learned early that adults' promises often shattered against harsher realities. "You're the lady who doesn't talk," she said suddenly to Leah. "Grandpa told me about you." Leah nodded, offering her hand to the child. After a moment's hesitation, Alice accepted it, allowing herself to be led upstairs while Jackson headed toward the north pasture to find Walter. In the bathroom, Leah filled the copper tub with water warmed on the stove. Alice watched every movement with the intensity of someone cataloging escape routes. When Leah gestured toward the tub, the girl clutched her ragged doll tighter. "Emily stays with me," she insisted. "She gets scared alone." Leah nodded her understanding, then wrote on her pad, "Emily can watch from here. She'll stay dry." Alice considered this compromise, finally placing the doll carefully on a nearby stool where it could observe the proceedings. The child's emaciation became fully apparent as she undressed, ribs prominent beneath dusty skin, shoulder blades sharp as wings. Drought had claimed more than crops. It had devoured childhood's whole. While Alice soaked, Leah retrieved one of her own dresses and gathered scissors and thread. By the time the girl emerged pink-skinned from the tub, Leah had modified the garment, shortening the hem, taking in the sides, adding a simple belt to gather the excess fabric. It would serve until proper children's clothes could be obtained. In the kitchen, Leah prepared oatmeal, sweetened with the last of Martha's preserved peaches. Alice ate with the restrained hunger of someone who'd learned that gulping food often meant there wouldn't be more later. "Where did you sleep?" Leah wrote while the girl ate. "Different places," Alice answered, carefully spooning another bite. "Hayloft first night. Then it rained, so I found the cellar." She glanced up. "Nobody comes. Down there much?" The logic of survival from one so young struck Leah profoundly. This child had assessed her surroundings and made tactical decisions about safety, food, and shelter. Skills no 8-year-old should need to develop. The kitchen door opened as Alice finished eating. Walter Miller entered first, his weathered face transforming at the sight of his granddaughter. Behind him came Jackson, his expression unreadable as he watched the reunion unfold. "Alice, girl," Walter breathed, dropping to one knee despite the obvious pain it caused his aging joints. "Thought I'd lost you too." The child launched herself into his arms. "They want to take me away, Grandpa," she sobbed, all pretense of stoicism, grumbling in his embrace. Now, Walter soothed, stroking her damp hair. "Let's not borrow trouble." Jackson cleared his throat. "Walter, take Alice to the porch swing. Miss Porter and I need a moment." Once they were alone, Jackson leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, tension evident in every line of his body. Reverend Patterson's been trying to improve this community since he arrived last spring, he said bitterly. Man sees sin and corruption everywhere except his own mirror. He met Leah's gaze directly. Patterson and the sheriff will be back. Walter can't fight them. He's dependent on ranch work since losing his land, and the bunkhouse is no place for a child. Leah nodded her understanding of the impossible situation. She hesitated, then wrote carefully. What if she stayed here? Jackson's eyebrows rose. With us? The question lingered between them, loaded with implications beyond the simple words, not just about Alice's future, but about what us might mean in this context. Leah wrote again, more deliberately. I could teach her. Have education. Would need a proper room, books. You've been here barely a week, Jackson pointed out. Taking on a child is different from housekeeping. Leah's chin lifted slightly, a gesture of determination rather than defiance. She turned to a fresh page in her notepad. I know what it means to lose everything, to be seen as less. She deserves better. Something shifted in Jackson's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a shared understanding that transcended her silence and his reticence. It won't be simple, he warned. Patterson has influence. The sheriff follows his lead. They'll claim 2 unmarried adults can't provide a proper home for a child. His gaze held hers. They'll use your condition against you. Leah felt the familiar twist of anger at how easily her silence was weaponized by others. She wrote rapidly, her pencil nearly tearing the paper. Let them try. A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's mouth. Didn't figure you for a fighter, Miss Porter. She responded with a single word. Survivor. The distinction hung between them as Jackson considered her determination. Finally, he nodded. We'll need to make this official somehow. Legal guardianship for Walter on paper, with Alice living here for educational purposes. I know a lawyer in Carson City who doesn't mind bending rules for the right reasons. He straightened, decision made. I'll speak to Walter. When they joined the pair on the porch, Walter was singing softly to Alice, an old lullaby about mockingbirds and diamond rings. The child's eyes were drooping, exhaustion finally claiming her now that safety had been established. Walter, Jackson began carefully, Miss Porter has a proposition about Alice. The old man looked up, hope and wariness battling in his rheumy eyes. What kind of proposition? Alice stays here at the main house, learns reading, figures, household management from Miss Porter. Proper education, proper environment that even Patterson can't argue with. Jackson's tone was deliberately casual, as if suggesting nothing more consequential than a change in fence lines. You retain guardianship, see her whenever you wish, but she has stability, protection from those Denver vultures. Walter studied them both, his gaze lingering on Leah. Why would you do this? He asked directly. Taking on another man's trouble? Leah wrote her answer, holding it where Walter could read the words for himself. She's not trouble. She's a child who deserves a chance. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. My Alice has a quick mind. Her mother taught her letters before. He trailed, off, unable to complete the painful history. She deserves more than I can give her now. Then it's settled, Jackson said. I'll ride to Carson City tomorrow, start the paperwork. Patterson can bluster all he wants, but with legal documentation he'll have no grounds to interfere. What? None of them realized, as they sat planning Alice's future on that sun-dappled porch, was that forces were already in motion that would threaten not just their arrangement, but the very existence of Raven Creek Ranch itself. The drought had created desperate men, and desperate men were approaching from the east with plans that would soon collide violently with the fragile sanctuary taking shape on Jackson Reed's land. Dawn broke with unusual activity at Raven Creek Ranch. Jackson saddled his most reliable gelding for the journey to Carson City, packing supplies for the 2-day ride. Legal matters couldn't be handled by telegram. This required personal attention and the kind of persuasion that only cash and long-standing friendships could facilitate. Leah prepared a hearty breakfast for the ranch hands, Alice shadowing her every movement in the kitchen with the attentiveness of someone eager to earn her place. The girl had slept in Martha's room with Leah, neither wanting to be separated after the emotional revelations of the previous day. "How long before Grandpa can visit?" Alice asked, carefully measuring coffee. Grounds as Leah had demonstrated. Leah held up 2 fingers, then gestured toward the noon position of an imaginary clock. 2 days at lunchtime? Alice interpreted correctly. That's when Mr. Reed gets back. Leah nodded, impressed by the child's quick understanding of her improvised sign language. There was a sharpness to Alice's perception that reminded Leah of herself at that age, observing everything, missing nothing, adapting to communicate however necessary. Jackson appeared in the doorway, hat already in place, saddlebag slung over one shoulder. His gaze lingered on the domestic scene before him, Alice and Leah working in synchronized movements, as if they'd been a team for years rather than hours. "I've spoken to the hands," he announced. "They'll keep watch while I'm gone. Any sign of the sheriff or Patterson, Carson will ride to intercept me on the Carson City Road." He turned his attention to Alice. "Mind Miss Porter while I'm away. Your grandfather will check on you both daily." The girl nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." "Miss Porter," Jackson addressed Leah directly. "There's a shotgun in my office. Carson knows how to reach it if needed." Leah's eyebrows rose at this information, not at the presence of the weapon, which was standard in any frontier household, but at Jackson's willingness to entrust his property's defense to others during his absence. Trust, she was learning, came neither easily nor completely to Jackson Reed. As he prepared to depart, Leah handed him a package wrapped in oilcloth, provisions for the journey superior to the jerky and hardtack he'd packed. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, a momentary contact that sent unexpected warmth through her hand. 2 days, he confirmed, mounting his horse. 3 at most. As hoofbeats faded into the distance, Leah turned her attention to establishing a routine for Alice. Structure would provide security for a child whose world had been defined by uncertainty. She retrieved slate and chalk from the ranch office, remnants of Martha's long-ago attempts to teach Jackson's father proper bookkeeping. The morning passed in assessment of Alice's education, adequate in basic reading, rudimentary in arithmetic, non-existent in sciences. The girl proved an eager student, her natural intelligence hampered only by sporadic schooling during her family's financial decline. By afternoon, they had moved to practical lessons in the garden, Leah demonstrating how to judge soil moisture and identify beneficial insects versus pests. Alice absorbed everything with the desperate hunger of a mind starved for structured learning. "Will Mr. Reed let me stay, even after Grandpa gets better arrangements?" she asked suddenly, hands deep in the soil as they transplanted late season. "Vegetables?" Leah paused, considering how to answer truthfully without promising what she couldn't guarantee. She reached for her notepad. "We'll make it work. Your place is with family." "But you and Mr. Reed aren't family," Alice pointed out with a child's unflinching logic. The observation struck uncomfortably close to the heart of their precarious arrangement. Leah chose her written words carefully. "Sometimes family is what we build, not what we're born into." Alice considered this, head tilted thoughtfully. "Like how Grandpa says his ranch hands are brothers without the same blood?" Leah nodded, relieved at the child's grasp of the concept. "Are you and Mr. Reed going to get married?" The question emerged with the startling directness only children can manage. "Mrs. Wilson in town said unmarried folks living together is sinful," That's why Reverend Patterson wants to send me away. Heat rushed to Leah's cheeks. She hadn't considered how their unusual household arrangement might appear to outsiders or to an observant child. She wrote quickly, "Mr. Reed and I have a working arrangement. Marriage isn't part of it." Alice digested this information, clearly unsatisfied. "But if you got married, they couldn't take me away so easy, could they? That's what Grandpa told my daddy when Mama left, that he needed to find a new wife so the authorities wouldn't question his raising me." The practical calculation in the child's assessment was heartbreaking. Leah touched Alice's shoulder gently, then wrote a single sentence, "We'll protect you without pretending." Evening approached with no sign of trouble from town. Walter arrived as promised, spending an hour with Alice before returning to the bunkhouse. The old man's gratitude manifested in a basket of early apples from the ranch's small orchard and news that the sheriff had departed for the county seat, buying them precious time. After Alice was tucked into bed, Leah sat at the kitchen table with the ranch account books, determined to understand Raven Creek's financial situation. If they were to secure Alice's future here, she needed to ensure the ranch itself remained viable. The numbers told a concerning story. While not destitute like most operations, Raven Creek's cash reserves had dwindled steadily over the past 18 months. Jackson had made strategic decisions, selling cattle early at lower prices rather than watching them starve, investing in deeper wells when surface water began disappearing. That had kept the ranch functioning while others failed. But sustainability required more than survival. Without significant rainfall soon or new revenue sources, even Raven Creek would eventually succumb to the same fate as her father's farm. A small, leather-bound book caught Leah's attention, tucked beneath the ledgers. Its pages contained precise meteorological records spanning 20 years, rainfall measurements, temperature patterns, frost dates, all in the same meticulous handwriting. The data revealed Jackson's scientific approach to ranching, his success built on observation rather than luck. The last entry, dated just 3 days earlier, noted cloud formations to the northwest that historically preceded autumn rainfall patterns. Jackson was tracking hope as methodically as he tracked despair. Leah was so absorbed in these records that the sound almost didn't register. Hoofbeats approaching at night, moving too quickly for casual travel. She extinguished the kitchen lamp, immediately instinct sending her to Alice's bedroom. The child slept peacefully, unaware of potential danger. Voices carried from the yard, unfamiliar men, 3 or 4 based on the overlapping conversations, not the ranch hands who would announce themselves, not Jackson, returning impossibly early from Carson City. Leah's heart raced as she remembered Jackson's warning about the shotgun, but reaching it meant crossing open space to the office, potentially visible through windows. Moving silently, she lifted Alice into her arms, the child stirring but not waking fully. "Hmm?" Alice murmured against her shoulder. Leah pressed a finger to her lips, carrying Alice toward the back of the house, where a small storage pantry offered better concealment than the bedrooms. She settled the drowsy child inside, wrapping her in a quilt against the night chill. "Stay quiet. Don't come out until I return," she wrote quickly on her notepad, illuminated by moonlight through the high window. "Are you getting the gun?" Alice whispered, now fully awake and frightened. Leah nodded, pressing the girl's doll into her hands for comfort. "Be careful," Alice urged, clutching Emily to her chest. "Emily says bad men don't expect ladies to fight back." The innocent wisdom nearly broke Leah's composure. She squeezed Alice's hand once before slipping away toward Jackson's office. The voices outside grew louder, arguing about something. Through the window, she glimpsed shadow figures near the barn, too far to make out faces, but their postures suggested disagreement rather than immediate threat. The office door creaked slightly as she entered. Moonlight silvered the room's sparse furnishings: desk, chair, map cabinet, gun rack. The shotgun hung above Jackson's desk alongside an older rifle. Leah reached for the shotgun, its weight unfamiliar but not foreign. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, though she'd rarely had cause to demonstrate the skill. A crash from the barn splintered the night's quiet, something heavy falling or being pushed over. Men's voices rose in argument, followed by the unmistakable flare of a match being struck. Through the office window, Leah watched in horror as flickering light bloomed inside the barn door. Fire. They were setting fire to the ranch. The simple vandalism she had feared was something far worse. Arson, destruction, perhaps even murder if the house was next. These weren't random drifters. This was calculated ruin. With the shotgun braced against her shoulder, Leah moved toward the front door. She had no voice to shout warning or threaten defense. She had only action, the universal language that even the voiceless could speak when protection of the innocent demanded it. What she couldn't know was that these men weren't just opportunistic criminals, but hired destroyers with specific instructions about Raven Creek Ranch, or that their employer had particular interest in ensuring Jackson Reed lost everything he had stubbornly preserved through the drought years, an old vendetta now reaching its endgame as flames began consuming the barn that held winter hay for the cattle that represented Raven Creek's future. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy in Leah's hands as she stepped onto the porch. Flames now licked eagerly at the barn's wooden frame, the dry timber catching quickly in the drought-parched air. 4 men stood silhouetted against the growing blaze, 3 watching while the 4th poured liquid from a metal container onto a pile of hay bales beside the corral. "Matheson wants the whole place gone by morning," one of them called. "Start on the bunkhouse next. Make sure those hands don't interfere." Kerosene. They were using kerosene to accelerate the destruction. The ranch hands' quarters lay on the other side of the property, separated from the main house by the barn and workshop. If the arsonists set fire to the bunkhouse next, Walter and the others might be trapped inside while they slept. Leah raised the shotgun and pulled both triggers. The blast shattered the night, sending twin loads of buckshot skyward. Not aimed to hit, she wanted to alert the hands, not kill the intruders, but the warning shot achieved its purpose. The men whirled toward the house, momentarily frozen in surprise at the unexpected resistance. The brief advantage wouldn't last. Leah broke the shotgun, fumbling to reload with shells from her pocket as the initial shock wore off and the men assessed their new situation. "It's just a woman," one of them shouted, squinting through the darkness. "Reed ain't here. His horse is gone." "Doesn't matter," another replied. Orders were clear. Burn it all. Deal with anyone who interferes. They began moving toward her, spreading out to approach from different angles. Leah managed to load one shell, snapping the shotgun closed as the closest man reached the bottom of the porch steps. His hand moved to his waistband, drawing a revolver. Lights flickered in the bunkhouse windows now. Her warning shot had roused the hands, but they were too far away to reach her in time. The shotgun's explosion rocked through Leah's shoulder as she fired at the porch steps, splintering wood mere inches from the gunman's feet. He jumped backward, stumbling into the yard with a curse. "She's reloading," another shouted. "Rush her now." Leah fumbled with the second shell, her trembling fingers betraying her as fear threatened to overwhelm determination. The shotgun slipped in her sweaty grasp as 2 men charged the porch steps simultaneously. A rifle shot cracked from the direction of the bunkhouse, then another. One of the attackers cried out, clutching his leg as he collapsed in the dirt. The others hesitated, heads swiveling toward this new threat. "Ranch hands are coming," someone yelled. "Get the horses!" The momentary confusion gave Leah time to reload fully. She stepped back into the doorway as the uninjured arsonists retreated toward the shadows beyond the burning barn, dragging their wounded companion between them. Hoofbeats thundered into the night as the attackers fled, abandoning their destruction half completed. From the bunkhouse, Walter and Carson emerged running, rifles in hand. The remaining hands followed close behind, carrying buckets toward the burning barn. "Miss Porter," Walter shouted, "are you hurt?" Leah shook her head, the shotgun still braced against her shoulder as adrenaline coursed through her body. "Alice?" His voice cracked with fear. "Where's Alice?" Leah gestured urgently toward the house. Walter rushed past her inside, while Carson organized the other men into a bucket line between the well and the barn. The flames had spread too far for complete salvation, but they might save the adjacent workshop if they worked quickly. Inside, Leah found Walter kneeling beside the storage pantry, Alice clutched tightly in his arms. The child was pale but dry-eyed, showing remarkable composure for one so young. "Who were they, Grandpa?" she asked. "Why did they want to burn our home?" The possessive pronoun, our home, struck Leah forcibly. In just days, Alice had claimed Raven Creek as her own, finding belonging where once had been only abandonment. Walter's weathered face hardened as he looked up at Leah over his granddaughter's head. "Matheson's men," he said grimly. "Heard them. Clear as day. Vernon Matheson's been trying to force out the smaller ranchers for years. Drought's given him the opportunity he wanted." Leah's expression asked the question her voice couldn't. "Matheson owns the bank that foreclosed on your father's farm," Walter explained. "Same bank that took my place and a dozen others. He's buying up all the distressed properties for pennies on the dollar, waiting for the rains to return." His eyes narrowed. "Reed's been the holdout, refused to sell, helped others resist too. Matheson wants him broken." Outside, the men shouted as a portion of the barn roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The immediate danger to the other buildings had passed, but the destruction was substantial. Without the barn, without winter hay, storage, Raven Creek's chances of surviving another season dwindled drastically. Leah reached for her notepad. "Jackson needs to be warned. Matheson might try to prevent him from reaching Carson City." Walter nodded grimly. "I'll send Carson at first light, fastest rider we have." Dawn arrived smoldering, revealing the full extent of the night's destruction. The barn was a blackened skeleton, the adjacent corral partially burned. The workshop had been saved, along with the equipment inside, small mercies amid devastating loss. Leah moved through the morning routine mechanically, preparing breakfast for the exhausted hands, while Alice set the table with uncharacteristic solemnity. The child had witnessed too much violence in her young life. This latest trauma layered atop earlier losses. As the men ate, Leah slipped away to Jackson's office. The ranch ledgers she'd studied the previous night held new significance in light of Walter's revelations about Vernon Matheson. She searched through the financial records, finding documentation of Jackson's gradual acquisition of water rights along Raven Creek, small but crucial purchases that secured the ranch's access to the diminishing resource, water. In drought, it was worth more than the land itself. Jackson had understood this fundamental truth and acted accordingly, securing Raven Creek's future while neighbors focused solely on immediate survival. A folded document tucked into the back of the main ledger caught her attention. Carefully, preserved survey maps showed that Raven Creek's watershed extended far beyond the ranch's boundaries, into lands Matheson had been systematically acquiring through foreclosure. If Jackson controlled the water rights, Matheson's land acquisitions would be substantially devalued without access to that water. The personal vendetta Walter described suddenly made perfect economic sense. This wasn't just about forcing out a stubborn rancher. It was about securing the resource that would make Matheson's expanded holdings profitable when the drought finally broke. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Carson stood in the doorway, saddlebags packed for his journey to find Jackson. "Miss Porter," he began hesitantly, "Walter says you should know. The sheriff's riding in from the east, alone, not with Matheson's men. But after last night..." He left the implication hanging, Leah nodded her understanding. The sheriff's sudden appearance following the attack couldn't be coincidental. Whether he was actively complicit with Matheson or merely serving as an unwitting tool remained to be seen. She reached for a fresh sheet of paper, writing quickly. Rather than waste precious time with a full accounting of the night's events, she composed a concise warning to Jackson. Matheson's men attacked the ranch. Barn destroyed. Sheriff approaching. Not coincidence. Everyone safe, but return cautiously. Water rights key to conflict. Memorize this if you can. She instructed Carson through written words. If not, keep it hidden. Find Jackson and return together. Carson departed immediately, taking a little used trail northeast that would intersect Jackson's likely route from Carson City. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, his expression appropriately concerned as he surveyed the charred remains of the barn. "Terrible business," he said, removing his hat as Walter and Leah met him in the yard. "Got word from a traveler about a fire out this way. Any idea who might have done such a thing?" His performance of ignorance might have been convincing if not for the timing of his arrival. No random traveler could have spread news so quickly. The sheriff had been informed or instructed by parties connected to the attack. Walter maintained a careful facade of cooperation, recounting the night's events while strategically omitting specific names overheard or the presence of Alice in the house. Leah watched the sheriff's reactions closely, noting how his questions repeatedly circled back to Jackson's whereabouts and expected return. "Shame about the timing," the sheriff remarked with artificial casualness. "Reed's absence during such trouble makes one wonder if the attack might have been prevented had the property owner been present." The implication was clear. Jackson's absence constituted negligence, potentially undermining any legal claims against the attackers. The groundwork for denying justice was already being laid. After the sheriff's departure, Leah stood in the yard, watching dust rise from his horse's hooves as he rode toward town. The day stretched before them with urgent tasks, salvaging what could be saved from the barn ruins, securing the property against further attacks, preparing for Jackson's return. But beneath these immediate concerns lay a deeper question. How could they fight an enemy who controlled not just physical force, but the very institutions meant to provide protection and justice? As if sensing her thoughts, Walter approached slowly. 20 years ago, he said quietly, Reed's father faced similar troubles from Matheson's father. Different drought, same tactics. He gazed thoughtfully at the distant hills. "Old man Reed didn't break then. His son won't break now." Leah turned to him, her expression questioning. "The Reeds have defenders most folks don't know about," Walter continued cryptically. "Jackson's mother was Navajo. His connections extend beyond what Matheson understands." This revelation reframed Leah's understanding of Jackson Reed. His self-sufficiency, his deep knowledge of the land's patterns, his ability to maintain water when others failed. He existed between worlds, drawing strength from both. What Walter couldn't know, as they stood contemplating uncertain futures, was that Jackson Reed was already riding hard for home. Carson's warning received hours earlier than expected, and he wasn't returning alone. Dusk descended on Raven Creek, painting the scorched barn ruins in muted orange. The ranch hands had worked tirelessly throughout the day, clearing debris and salvaging what little remained undamaged. Now they positioned themselves strategically around the property. 2 men at the main house, 2 patrolling the perimeter, rifles ready should Matheson's arsonists return. Leah stood at the kitchen window, watching Alice help Walter feed the horses they'd moved to the smaller corral near the bunkhouse. The child's resilience continued to astonish her. Despite the terror of the previous night, Alice had thrown herself into recovery efforts with determination beyond her years, carrying water, holding tools, offering encouragement to the exhausted men. A movement on the distant ridge caught Leah's attention. Riders appearing against the sunset, silhouettes backlit by the fading light. More than two, which meant not just Jackson and Carson returning. She tapped the window glass sharply, signaling Walter in the yard below. He turned, following her pointing gesture toward the approaching group. "Get inside," he called to Alice, his voice carrying the edge of renewed anxiety. "Miss Porter, the shotgun!" Leah had already retrieved the weapon, standing ready at the front. "Duga," as Walter hurried the child inside. The riders drew closer, moving at a steady pace rather than the charge of an attack force. As they descended into the valley, details became clearer. 5 riders, with Jackson and Carson at the lead. "It's the boss," Walter confirmed, squinting into the distance. "But I don't recognize the others." The others became more distinct. As they approached, 3 men with the unmistakable bearing and features of Navajo warriors. They rode without saddles, guiding their painted horses with subtle knee pressure, backs straight as lance poles. Each carried a rifle across his lap, with the comfortable familiarity of experienced fighters. Jackson dismounted first when they reached the yard, his expression darkening as he surveyed the destruction. The Navajo riders remained on horseback, watchful and silent. "Matheson," Jackson stated rather than asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Walter nodded. "His men clear as day. Sheriff's already been and gone, asking more questions about you than about the arsonists." Jackson's jaw tightened as he turned to Leah, who stood in the doorway with the shotgun still braced in her arms. Something changed in his expression as he took in her stance, a recognition, perhaps even admiration, that hadn't been there before. "Carson says you drove them off," he said quietly. "Saved the house and the hands." Leah lowered the shotgun, suddenly self-conscious, under his intense gaze and the evaluating eyes of the Navajo warriors. She nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that concealed the terror she'd felt facing armed men alone. "This is Miss Porter," Jackson said, turning to the mounted men. "And the child is Alice Miller, Walter's granddaughter." He switched to the Navajo language, speaking for several minutes while gesturing toward the burned barn and then the surrounding property. The eldest of the Navajo men, silver-streaked hair pulled back beneath a faded red bandana, responded in the same language, his weathered face impassive, yet somehow conveying authority that transcended the obvious age difference between him and Jackson. Jackson nodded respectfully before addressing Walter and Leah again. "This is Hastin Sosi, my mother's brother. With him are his sons, Nathan and Daniel. They've come to help defend what remains of Raven Creek, the significance of native warriors openly allying themselves with a white rancher wasn't lost on Walter, whose eyebrows rose sharply. Such cooperation crossed boundaries rarely bridged in the prejudice-laden atmosphere of 1934 America. "The spirits sent word of danger through the night winds," Hastings said in carefully measured English, dismounting with fluid grace despite his years. "My sister's son carries both worlds in his blood. We honor her memory by standing with him." Now, inside the house, explanations and strategic discussions continued over a hastily prepared meal. Alice watched the Navajo men with undisguised fascination, particularly when Daniel, the youngest at perhaps 20, demonstrated how to carve a small wooden horse from a piece of kindling. Jackson spread survey maps across the kitchen table, using coffee cups to weight the corners. Matheson's move wasn't just vandalism, he explained. It was calculated. The barn held the winter hay we cut from the north pasture. Without it, I'd be forced to sell off half the herd before winter. Meanwhile, he's positioned to buy those cattle at distress prices through his agent in Carson City. He doesn't just want your land, Walter added. He wants control of Raven Creek's water rights. I've explained to Miss Porter how you've secured the watershed. Jackson's gaze shifted to Leah, a question in his eyes. She reached for her notepad. Found the water documents in your office. connected them to Matheson's land purchases. He can't profit without access to your water, which is why he's escalated to violence, Jackson concluded. Legal maneuvers haven't worked. I've refused his offers. The droughts lasted longer than he anticipated, and his investments are at risk. Hastin Tsosi had remained silent during this exchange, his dark eyes taking in the dynamics between the ranch's unlikely defenders. Now he spoke, his words carrying the weight of generations. Water has always been the true wealth of this land. Before white borders, before papers with government seals, the people understood this. He studied the map with knowing eyes. Your enemy thinks like the cavalry generals. That overwhelming force brings victory. He does not understand the patience of the desert. My uncle speaks wisdom, Jackson translated unnecessarily. Matheson expects us to abandon Raven Creek after this attack. When we don't, he'll come with greater force, but hastily, angrily. Emotion clouds judgment. A plan emerged through the evening's discussion. The Navajo warriors would remain hidden, their presence unknown to Matheson or the sheriff. Carson and the other hands would make conspicuous preparations to move the cattle, suggesting Jackson was planning to sell the herd, exactly what Matheson wanted. Meanwhile, Jackson would ride to town tomorrow, ostensibly to negotiate cattle and prices, but actually to confront Matheson directly. And what of Alice? Walter asked as the strategy session concluded. If trouble comes again, the child shouldn't be here. All eyes turned to the girl, who had fallen asleep against Daniel's shoulder while he continued carving wooden figures for her collection. The mission school 30 miles south would take her, Walter suggested reluctantly. Not ideal, but safer than here if shooting starts. Jackson shook his head firmly. Missions separate children from their culture, their family. I've seen what that does. The shadow that crossed his face suggested personal experience with such institutions. There's another option. His gaze settled on Leah, measuring her reaction as he continued. Miss Porter could take Alice to the Navajo settlement beyond the eastern ridge. They would both be safe there until this conflict is resolved. The implication was clear. Jackson was offering Leah an escape route as well, recognition that she had not signed on for armed confrontation when accepting the housekeeper position. Leah considered the proposal, aware of the many layers beneath the simple suggestion. The opportunity to retreat from danger warred with her growing investment in Raven Creek's fate and in the people now gathered around its kitchen table. She wrote decisively on her notepad. Alice goes if Walter agrees. I stay. Jackson's expression revealed surprise quickly masked. The fighting won't be suited to... Leah cut him off with a sharp gesture, writing again with emphatic strokes. This is my home now too. I can shoot, I can plan, I can fight. The declaration hung in the silence that followed. Home. She had claimed Raven Creek as her own, just as surely as Alice had. The foreclosure notice that had begun her journey suddenly seemed distant and irrelevant, a closing door that had led to an unexpected opening. Hastin Tsosi broke the silence with a soft chuckle. The quiet ones often carry the strongest spirits, he observed. My people have stories of women warriors who led when men could not find the path. Walter cleared his throat. If Miss Porter's staying, so am I, and so is Alice. My granddaughter's lost enough homes. We face this together, or not at all. Jackson studied each of them in turn. The aging ranch hand who had become family, the silent woman who had defended his property with unexpected courage, the child who represented both vulnerability and hope amid destruction. Finally, he nodded, accepting their decision. Then we prepare for what comes, he said simply. All of us. Through the night, preparation continued. The Navajo men constructed hidden observation points at strategic locations surrounding the ranch. Walter and Carson reinforced the house windows with wooden shutters designed to resist gunfire. Jackson inventoried ammunition and distributed weapons to those who could use them. Leah worked alongside them, her silence no barrier to contribution. She prepared medical supplies, organized food provisions that could withstand a potential siege, and sketched detailed maps of the property showing water sources and defensive positions. Near midnight, she found herself alone with Jackson in the ranch office, marking final additions to the defense plan. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the weariness etched there. "You could have left," he said quietly, breaking the companionable silence between them. "Taken the train ticket to Chicago, found safer work." Leah considered his words, then wrote her response with careful deliberation. "Running doesn't solve anything. I learned that watching my father lose hope farm by farm, acre by acre. Sometimes you must stand and fight, even against impossible odds." Jackson read her words, something shifting in his expression. "When you arrived, I saw someone useful but temporary. Now I see—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Someone who understands what Raven Creek means. Not just land and cattle, but a way of living against the current of easy surrender." The recognition in his eyes kindled warmth within Leah that had nothing to do with the stuffy office or physical exertion. His assessment went beyond her practical abilities to the core of who she was. Someone whose silence had been mistaken for weakness by others, but never again by herself. What neither of them could know, as they finalized preparations for the coming confrontation, was that Vernon Matheson had already set in motion a final, devastating plan, one that targeted not just Raven Creek's land and water, but the very legal claim Jackson Reed had to his inheritance, relying on prejudices deeply embedded in the country's laws to separate a mixed-blood rancher from his rightful property. Dawn broke with tense stillness over Raven Creek Ranch. Jackson saddled his horse with deliberate movements, preparing for the confrontation in town. He donned his best shirt, not formal by city standards, but the cleanest and least worn of his possessions, and strapped on a gun belt that showed signs of regular maintenance despite infrequent use. "Remember," he instructed the gathered defenders, "in the yard, this is about appearances. I need Matheson to believe we're preparing to sell the cattle, that his plan is working. Meanwhile, Haston and his sons will monitor the property boundaries. Any sign of approaching riders, fall back to defensive positions." Leah stood on the porch, Alice and Walter beside her. The child clung to her hand, anxiety evident in her tight grip. Despite their collective decision to face the threat together, the reality of Jackson riding alone into potential danger weighed heavily on all of them. "What if Mr. Matheson won't talk to you?" Alice asked, voicing the concern evident on every face. Jackson adjusted his hat, buying time to frame an answer suitable for a child's ears. "Men like Matheson always want to talk. They enjoy explaining their victories almost as much as achieving them." His expression softened as he looked at Alice. "Don't worry, I have no intention of giving him anything to celebrate." Before mounting, he approached Leah, lowering his voice. "If I'm not back by sundown, get everyone to the Navajo settlement. The deed to Raven Creek is hidden beneath the floorboards in my bedroom, under the southwest corner post of the bed. It needs to reach Judge Hamilton in Carson City. He's the only one who can counter whatever legal maneuvers Matheson attempts." Leah nodded, her expression revealing nothing of the anxiety his contingency planning provoked. She wrote quickly, on her notepad, "Be careful. Matheson didn't become powerful by playing fair. Neither did I," Jackson replied with grim determination. He hesitated, then added more softly, "Raven Creek has never had a defender like you, Leah Porter. Whatever happens today, know that you've already changed its future." The use of her first name, a boundary uncrossed until now, hung significantly between them. Before she could respond, Jackson mounted his horse and rode toward town, his straight-backed silhouette gradually diminishing against the morning light. Hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Leah kept Alice occupied with lessons, using the kitchen table as an impromptu schoolroom, while maintaining vigilant watch through the windows. Walter and Carson rotated guard positions with Hastings' sons, the unusual alliance functioning with surprising efficiency. Midday brought an unexpected visitor, Sarah Jenkins, daughter of the general store owner in Oak Ridge, arriving in a wagon loaded with supplies. Her appearance at the gate prompted momentary alarm until Walter recognized her. Jackson sent word from town, she explained as the hands helped unload. Burlap sacks of flour, sugar, and coffee. Said you might need provisions if things get difficult. Pa added extra ammunition under the beans. She lowered her voice, glancing anxiously over her shoulder. There's talk in town. Matheson's gathered. Men at the Silver Dollar. The sheriff's nowhere to be seen. Walter nodded grimly. Any sign of Jackson when you left? Heading toward the bank, Sarah confirmed, walking tall, looking like he owned the place. She hesitated, then added, Pa says to tell you folks that not everyone in Oak Ridge stands. With Matheson, there are those who remember how Reed helped during the worst of the drought, extending credit when the bank wouldn't. This information, that Jackson had silent supporters in town, provided unexpected comfort. Matheson's influence, while substantial, wasn't absolute. Small acts of loyalty, like the Jenkins family risking Matheson's displeasure to deliver supplies, suggested the community fabric remained stronger than fear. As Sarah prepared to depart, she pressed a folded newspaper into Leah's hands. Thought you should see this. Came on yesterday's mail stage. The Sacramento Bee's headline proclaimed, Federal Drought Relief Program announced. Roosevelt administration pledges support for stricken agricultural regions. The article detailed government plans to purchase cattle at fair market prices from drought-affected ranchers, preventing the price collapse that had devastated so many. Leah's hands trembled slightly as she grasped the implications. If this program reached their region soon, Matheson's strategy of forcing distressed sales would collapse. His entire plan depended on acquiring land and cattle at ruinous prices before conditions improved. The federal intervention threatened his scheme at its foundation. She showed the paper to Walter, whose weathered face broke into its first genuine smile in days. No wonder Matheson's accelerated his timeline, he said. This news would reach us officially within the week. He's making his final play before government men arrive with purchasing authority. The revelation transformed their understanding of the immediate conflict. Matheson wasn't just acting from opportunistic greed, he was racing against a clock about to expire. His desperation made him more dangerous, but also potentially more careless. Late afternoon brought another development. Daniel Tsosi, returning from his surveillance position on the eastern ridge, riding hard. Riders coming, he reported in clipped English. 6 men, heavily armed, not from town, approaching from county line, moving with purpose. Walter's expression darkened. Gunmen from outside the county. Matheson's bringing in hired muscle where nobody knows their faces. He turned to Leah. Get Alice to the storm cellar. This won't be like the arsonists. These men are killers. The defensive plan activated with practiced efficiency. Carson and the remaining hand took positions at upstairs, windows with rifles. Hastings and Nathan Tsosi concealed themselves near the approach road, prepared to target riders from behind once they committed to attacking the house. Walter and Daniel covered the rear of the property against potential flanking maneuvers. Leah secured Alice in the storm cellar with food, water, and strict instructions to remain hidden regardless of what she heard above. The girl's eyes were wide with fear but steady, a child forced to mature beyond her years by circumstances beyond her control. Emily says, "You'll stop the bad men like you did before," Alice whispered, clutching her doll. She says you're brave. Even without a voice, the simple faith nearly undid Leah's composure. She hugged Alice fiercely before closing the cellar doors and returning to the house, shotgun in hand. The hired gunmen would find Raven Creek defended by more than they anticipated. She positioned herself at the kitchen window, which offered clear sightlines to the main approach. Minutes stretched into an excruciating half-hour of waiting. The sun began its westward descent, shadows lengthening across the yard, when distant hoofbeats finally announced the approaching threat. What happened next occurred with such speed that individual moments blurred together. The riders appeared at the property boundary, slowing to assess the seemingly quiet ranch. Carson's warning shot kicked up dirt near the lead horse, signaling their awareness. The riders scattered for cover, returning fire that splintered wood. Around the house's windows, Leah held her position, waiting for a clear target. The discipline Jackson had instilled in his defenders kept them from wasting ammunition on uncertain shots. Their restraint confused the attackers, who had expected panicked, disorganized resistance. When the gunmen attempted to advance from different angles, they exposed themselves to the hidden Navajo defenders. Two precise shots from Hastin and Nathan forced them back to their initial positions. The standoff continued, minutes stretching with sporadic gunfire as the attackers tested the ranch's defenses. A movement to the west caught Leah's attention, a lone rider approaching fast, not from the direction of town, but from the hills beyond. The figure rode low against the horse's neck, pushing the animal to impressive speed across difficult terrain. Jackson. He had somehow circled around the attackers, perhaps warned of their approach by supporters in town. His return path suggested strategic thinking rather than desperation. He was positioning himself to trap the gunman between his approach and the ranch's defenders. One of the attackers spotted the new threat, shouting warning to his companions. They turned to face this unexpected development, suddenly caught in an untenable position, exposed to fire from both directions. Jackson's voice carried across the distance, impressively commanding, "Drop your weapons or die where you stand. The ranch is surrounded." It was a bluff, but delivered with such authority that uncertainty rippled visibly through the gunmen's ranks. When a shot from Nathan Sosey's rifle simultaneously knocked the hat from one man's head, the psychological impact proved devastating. Two attackers immediately threw down their weapons. A third attempted to aim at Jackson, but was disabled by Carson's shot through his shoulder. The remaining gunmen, recognizing their position was compromised, retreated in disarray, abandoning their hired companions to whatever justice awaited them. The confrontation ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an eerie quiet, broken only by the moans of the wounded attacker and the nervous shuffling of horses. Jackson rode into the yard, dismounting with fluid grace that belied the tension of the moment. "Everyone unharmed?" he called toward the house. Walter emerged from his position, supporting Daniel, who limped slightly but appeared otherwise intact. Took a splinter to the leg from a close shot. "Nothing serious." Jackson nodded with evident relief, then gestured toward the captured gunman. "Secure them in the workshop. Carson, tend to the wounded one. We need him alive for questioning." The immediate crisis subsided. Leah retrieved Alice from the storm cellar. The child launched herself toward Jackson, wrapping thin arms around his waist with surprising strength. "You came back," she said simply. "Emily said you would." A shadow of emotion crossed Jackson's face as he awkwardly patted Alice's shoulder. "Emily sounds very wise," he replied, his voice gentler than Leah had ever heard it. When Alice released him, Jackson turned to Leah, his expression communicating volumes beyond spoken language. Relief, respect, and something deeper reflected in his storm-gray eyes. She returned his gaze steadily, the shotgun still braced confidently in her arms, no longer the desperate banker's daughter forced from her home, but a defender who had found her place and her strength. What neither of them realized in that moment of hard-won reprieve was that Vernon Matheson had never intended the gunman to succeed. They were merely a distraction from his actual strategy, now unfolding in the county courthouse where papers were being filed that would test not just Jackson's claim to Raven Creek, but Leah's newfound voice in ways none of them had anticipated. Evening descended on Raven Creek with uneasy calm. The captured gunmen had been secured in the workshop under Carson's watchful eye. The wounded man's shoulder had been bandaged, painful but not life-threatening, while his companions sat sullenly on overturned crates, hands bound behind them. Inside the main house, Jackson assembled everyone around the kitchen table, his expression grave as he relayed the day's developments in town. Matheson wasn't at the bank, he began, accepting the coffee Leah poured. He was at the courthouse with Judge Brennan, who, not coincidentally, owes the bank substantial money. His jaw tightened. They've filed papers challenging my ownership of Raven Creek on grounds that would make any lawyer with a conscience sick. What grounds? Walter demanded, leaning forward. That my mother's Navajo blood invalidates my inheritance claim. They're citing the Indian Intercourse Act and arguing that as a half-breed, their words, I lack standing to hold title to white-owned property. The bitterness in Jackson's voice couldn't mask the deeper hurt beneath. My father's will, recorded 20 years ago, apparently holds no weight against their legal maneuvering. Hastings Sosey's face remained impassive, though the slight narrowing of his eyes revealed his understanding of this insidious strategy. They attack through your mother's blood because they cannot defeat you through honest means. It gets worse, Jackson continued. While I was discovering this at the courthouse, Sarah Jenkins slipped me a note. Matheson's scheduled a foreclosure auction for Raven Creek 3 days from now. He's already advertising in the county seat newspaper. But how? Walter sputtered. The ranch isn't in debt. You've made every payment on the water rights purchases. Fraudulent documentation, Jackson replied grimly. Judge Brennan signed off on paperwork claiming unpaid property taxes dating back 5 years. By the time I could prove otherwise, Matheson would own Raven Creek at auction prices. The cruel brilliance of the strategy stunned them all into momentary silence. Matheson had constructed an attack that exploited both racial prejudice and corrupt officials, combining legal maneuvering with strategic violence to ensure his victory from multiple angles. Leah's pencil moved rapidly across her notepad, her expression intensely focused. The newspaper with the drought relief program. Could it help? Government agents wouldn't allow illegal foreclosure if they're planning to stabilize the cattle market. Jackson scanned her note, a flicker of consideration crossing his features. Possibly, but government representatives won't reach this region. For weeks, Matheson's timeline deliberately preempts their arrival. Alice, who had been sitting quietly beside Walter, spoke up unexpectedly. What about the judge in Carson City? The one Miss Porter was supposed to take the deed to if you didn't come back. Jackson's eyes widened slightly at the child's recall. Judge Hamilton. Yes. He outranks Brennan and has no financial ties to Matheson. He straightened, the first hints of a counter-offensive forming. If we could get the deed and documentation to him before the auction. 3 days hard riding to Carson City and back, Walter calculated, assuming Hamilton acts immediately. On the evidence. Hastings leaned forward, his weathered hands flat against the table. My people can provide fresh horses at points along the way. A skilled rider could make the journey in less time. All eyes turned to Nathan Sosey, whose reputation as an exceptional horseman was apparently well established. The young man nodded once, accepting the unspoken nomination. Jackson pushed back from the table. Decision made. I'll gather the documentation tonight. Nathan leaves at first light with everything Hamilton needs to invalidate Matheson's claims. And what of us here? Walter asked. 3 days is plenty of time for Matheson to try again, with more men, better armed. We hold, Jackson stated, simply. The captured gunmen give us leverage, proof of Matheson's methods that even a corrupt sheriff can't ignore completely. Their presence here complicates any further attacks. As the men dispersed to implement the plan, Leah remained at the table, her expression thoughtful. Jackson noticed her hesitation. You have concerns, he asked quietly, sitting beside her. She wrote carefully, each word measured. Matheson will expect documentation to be sent to Carson City. He'll have men watching the roads. Jackson nodded. You're right. Which is why Nathan won't take the main roads. He'll travel through Navajo land, where Matheson's men wouldn't dare follow, or know how to navigate if they tried. Leah considered this, then wrote again. What if Judge Hamilton isn't sympathetic? The same prejudices Matheson is exploiting exist. Throughout the system, her question cut to the heart of their vulnerability. Jackson's hands tensed briefly before he responded. Hamilton once ruled against a mining company trying to seize Navajo grazing land. His reputation for fairness, while rare, is solid. He paused, adding more quietly, but you're right to question it. Nothing is certain when my mother's heritage becomes central to the case. Something in his tone, a mixture of old pain and resigned acceptance, prompted Leah to reach across the table, her hand covering his briefly. The gesture conveyed understanding beyond words, an acknowledgement of battles fought against prejudices she could recognize even if she couldn't fully share them. She wrote again, determined to address practical matters. Alice should go with Nathan. Safer in Carson City until this resolves. Absolutely not, Walter interjected from the doorway, having overheard. I'm not sending my granddaughter off with... He stopped abruptly, glancing apologetically at Jackson. I mean no disrespect to your family, but she belongs with me. Your concern is understandable, Jackson replied evenly. But consider this. If Matheson succeeds, what happens to Alice? The same authorities threatening to send her to that Denver orphanage will still have power here. Walter's weathered face creased with the impossible calculation of a grandfather torn between keeping his grandchild close and ensuring her ultimate safety. I'll go with her, he decided suddenly. Nathan can get us both to Carson City. If Hamilton rules in our favor, we return. If not, he squared his shoulders. Alice and I will find another way forward. The decision, while painful, held undeniable logic. Walter and Alice would depart with Nathan at dawn, carrying both documentation for Judge Hamilton and themselves to safety beyond Matheson's reach. As preparations continued into the night, Leah found herself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes, with mechanical efficiency, while her mind processed the day's revelations. Jackson's mixed heritage, concealed but not denied, explained much about his independent operation of Raven Creek, a man positioned between worlds, never fully accepted by either, forging his own path through determination and strategic isolation. She understood such isolation intimately. Her silence had similarly placed her between worlds, present but not participating, seen but not heard, judged as less without opportunity to demonstrate otherwise. The parallel struck her with unexpected force. Perhaps this explained the unspoken understanding that had developed between them, an alliance of those who navigated life from its margins rather than its accepted center. A soft sound interrupted her reflections. Jackson stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. I should have told you about my mother, he said without preamble. About the complications my heritage creates for Raven Creek's legal standing. Leah dried her hands and reached for her notepad. Would it have changed my decision to stay? Most would consider it relevant information, he countered. She wrote again, more emphatically. I judge people by their actions, not their bloodlines. You offered shelter when I had none. The rest is immaterial. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a tension easing, a guard lowering incrementally. He moved further into the kitchen, stopping closer than their usual careful distance. "There's something else you should know," he continued, "something I discovered in town today." He hesitated, clearly weighing his next words. "Matheson doesn't just want Raven Creek. He's systematically targeting every property foreclosed during the drought, including your father's farm." The revelation struck Leah like physical impact. Her father's land, the home she'd been forced to abandon, the final resting place of her parents in the small family plot behind the apple orchard, was part of Matheson's grand acquisition strategy. The drought relief program would have saved it, Jackson continued quietly. Federal funds to restructure loans, assistance for replanting. If your father had held on just months longer. He trailed off, recognizing the cruelty of such hypotheticals. Leah stood motionless, absorbing this information. The banker who had pushed the foreclosure notice across the courthouse desk. She now understood he had likely been acting under Matheson's direction, part of the calculated consolidation of distressed properties, her grief transmuted into something harder, more focused. She wrote with deliberate strokes. "This isn't just about saving Raven Creek anymore. It's about justice for everyone Matheson has destroyed." Jackson studied her words, then met her gaze directly. "Yes, which is why what happens in the next 3 days matters beyond these boundaries." The weight of this shared understanding settled between them, creating a different kind of connection than had existed before. Not just mutual respect or pragmatic alliance, but common cause rooted in personal wounds. What neither could fully articulate in that moment was how completely their individual paths had converged. Leah Porter had arrived at Raven Creek, believing she had nothing left to lose. Now she stood with everything at stake, not just shelter and purpose, but the possibility of reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken, of finding justice for her father's memory, of building something new from destruction's aftermath. As moonlight spilled through the kitchen window, casting silver patterns across the worn floorboards, the ranch's unlikely defenders prepared for the most important battle of their lives, one that would be fought not just with guns and barricades, but with documents and testimonies, with moral courage against corrupt power, with truth against carefully constructed lies. What they couldn't know was that Matheson, having anticipated their potential countermove toward Carson City, had already dispatched men to intercept any messengers on the roads leading west. The stakes would rise higher still before dawn brought Nathan Sozie's departure, and with it Raven Creek's last, desperate chance for salvation. Pre-dawn stillness wrapped Raven Creek in hushed anticipation. Nathan Sozie readied 3 horses. In the yard, while Walter secured provisions and documents for the journey, Alice sat on the porch steps, Emily the doll clutched protectively against her chest, watching the adults' hurried preparations with solemn eyes. Inside, Jackson reviewed the legal paperwork one final time, ensuring everything Judge Hamilton would need was included. The original deed signed by his father, tax receipts proving Matheson's claims fraudulent, and a sworn statement detailing the campaign of intimidation and violence against the ranch. "This must reach Hamilton directly," he instructed Nathan. "Trust no intermediaries, regardless of their credentials. Too many officials in this region have connections to Matheson's interests." Nathan nodded, his expression resolute. "I will not fail you, cousin." Leah entered the room carrying a leather satchel she'd modified with concealed pockets sewn into the lining. She demonstrated how the most critical documents could be hidden there, protected from weather and casual inspection. The practicality of her solution drew appreciative nods from both men. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Porter," Jackson said quietly. She accepted the compliment with a slight nod, then passed him a sealed envelope she'd prepared earlier. Jackson opened it, finding a carefully written letter inside, her testimony about the foreclosure of her father's farm, the connection to Matheson's acquisitions, and the pattern she'd identified from the ranch's records. "Your voice on paper," Jackson observed, understanding the significance of her contribution. "This strengthens our case considerably." Outside, Hastin Sosi approached the departing riders, placing his hands on his son's shoulders in a gesture of blessing. To Walter and Alice, he offered small leather pouches containing protective herbs. "For safe passage," he explained, "the spirits will watch your journey." Walter accepted the gift with uncharacteristic humility. The old ranch hand who had initially distrusted sending Alice with a Navajo rider now stood as ally and friend too. Jackson's extended family, cultural differences bridged by common cause. As dawn streaked the eastern sky with pale gold, final preparations concluded. Nathan mounted first, then helped Alice settle in front of Walter on the second horse. The third animal carried additional supplies and would serve as backup should any mount tire during their demanding journey. "Remember," Jackson instructed, "stay on Navajo land until you reach the western pass. Matheson's men won't follow you." There, the departure moment arrived with painful abruptness. Quick goodbyes, final instructions, and then the three riders were moving away from the ranch, silhouettes diminishing against the brightening horizon. Leah watched until they disappeared from view, her hand unconsciously seeking Jackson's arm. For momentary stability, "They'll make it," he assured her, his voice carrying more confidence than his eyes revealed. "Nathan knows every hidden trail through these mountains." She nodded, willing herself to believe it. Their contingency plan was underway. Now came the harder task of holding Raven Creek until help could arrive. Hastin and Daniel took positions on the eastern and northern boundaries, invisible sentinels to warn of approaching threats. Carson questioned the captured gunmen, leveraging their injuries and isolation to extract information about Matheson's plans. Jackson and Leah inventoried remaining ammunition and supplies, preparing for potential siege. Mid-morning brought the expected visitor. Sheriff Taylor riding alone to the ranch, his expression set in professional neutrality that fooled no one. "Got reports of gunfire out this way yesterday," he announced as Jackson met him in the yard. "Need to investigate any casualties or damages." "Funny timing," Jackson replied evenly. "Just after Matheson's hired guns attacked my property. 3 of them are in my workshop if you'd like to arrest them for attempted murder." The sheriff's composure faltered momentarily. "Serious accusations require evidence, Reed, especially when directed at prominent citizens like Mr. Matheson. I have 3 witnesses who heard the gunman mention Matheson by name, plus bullet holes in my house that match their weapons." Jackson's tone remained measured despite the underlying anger. "Or does evidence only matter when it doesn't implicate your financial benefactors?" The barb struck visibly, color rising. In the sheriff's face. "Watch yourself, Reed. Your standing in this county is increasingly tenuous. Judge Brennan's reviewing your property claim as we speak." "On fraudulent grounds," Jackson countered, "which will be proven when Judge Hamilton in Carson City receives the documentation already en route to his chambers." This revelation clearly surprised the sheriff, his eyes widening slightly before he controlled his reaction. "Hamilton has no jurisdiction here. Federal land disputes involving Native American claims fall under his purview," Jackson stated, something Matheson overlooked in his haste to manipulate local authorities. The chess move was bold, revealing their counter-strategy. Might alert Matheson, but it also established legal protection. If anything happened to Jackson or the ranch now, with federal authorities already notified, the consequences would extend beyond what Matheson could control through local corruption. The sheriff departed unsatisfied but cautious, his uncertainty about this new development evident in his rigid posture. Once he was beyond earshot, Carson approached from his observation post. He'll ride straight to Matheson, he predicted grimly. They'll know about the Carson City plan within the hour. Jackson nodded. That was calculated. Now Matheson faces a choice: continue his legal maneuvering here or divert resources to intercept our messengers. Either way, it divides his attention and forces. The tactical thinking impressed Leah, who had watched the exchange from the porch. Jackson had transformed a potential vulnerability into strategic advantage, using truth as both shield and weapon. The day progressed with tense vigilance. Each distant dust cloud prompted defensive readiness. Every unusual sound brought hands to weapons. Yet no attack materialized. Either Matheson was regrouping, or he had indeed diverted his focus to intercepting the Carson City messengers. By evening, Leah found herself standing beside Jackson on the porch, watching stars emerge in the velvet sky. The day's silence felt more ominous than reassuring, the calm before a gathering storm rather than victory's reprieve. They should have reached Navajo territory by now, Jackson said, gazing westward as if he might glimpse the riders despite the impossible distance. Safe from immediate pursuit, at least. Leah touched his arm, drawing his attention to her notepad. You've built something remarkable here. Not just a ranch, but a place where people of different worlds stand together. Jackson considered her words, his expression softening in the fading light. Necessity forced that alliance, not any grand vision of mine. She shook her head, writing again with emphatic strokes. Necessity reveals character. It doesn't create it. These men follow you because you've earned their respect, not their fear. The distinction seemed to strike him deeply. For a man accustomed to measuring himself against his father's legacy while navigating prejudice about his mother's heritage, such recognition offered rare validation. If we succeed, he said quietly, if Raven Creek survives this fight, what then for you? Would you stay, continue as you have been? The question contained layers beneath its surface. About her role at the ranch, about her place in the life they were defending, about possibilities neither had articulated directly. Leah considered carefully before writing her response. I lost one home to Matheson. I won't surrender another without fight. Whatever comes after belongs to both of us. Her deliberate use of us rather than me acknowledged the partnership that had formed between them, forged in crisis but pointing towards something more enduring. Jackson read her words twice, understanding their significance. Before he could respond, Daniel Tsosi appeared at the edge of the yard, moving with urgent purpose rather than his usual fluid grace. Riders, he reported tersely, many, coming fast from town. The momentary connection between Jackson and Leah dissolved into immediate action. Carson was alerted, defensive positions taken, weapons distributed. Through field glasses, Jackson counted at least 15 mounted men approaching, Matheson himself at their lead, the sheriff reluctantly following, and behind them armed enforcers, presenting a show of overwhelming force. They're not hiding their intentions, Jackson observed grimly. This is their endgame, force us out before Hamilton can intervene. Leah positioned herself at an upstairs window, shotgun braced and ready. The approaching confrontation would determine everything, not just ownership of Raven Creek, but justice for everyone Matheson had wronged, including her father. As the riders halted at the property boundary, Matheson's voice carried clearly across the evening air. Jackson Reed, by order of Judge Brennan, you're to vacate this property. Immediately. The title has been invalidated pending review. Jackson stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. Interesting timing, Matheson, especially with documentation already en route to federal authorities proving your fraud. Empty threats, Matheson dismissed. No messenger of yours will reach Carson City. My men watch every road west. Who said anything about roads? Jackson's confident response gave Matheson momentary pause. The standoff teetered on violence's edge. Matheson's force numerically superior, but facing defenders in entrenched positions. The first shot, when it came, would trigger bloodshed from which there would be no retreat. What none of them expected was the sound that broke the tense. Silence. Not gunfire, but hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the east. All heads turned as riders appeared on the ridge, overlooking the ranch. Not Nathan returning impossibly early, but uniformed men on military-grade horses, the lead rider carrying a document case prominently displaying federal insignia. Federal. Drought Relief Commission, the lead rider announced, his voice carrying authority that silenced even Matheson. By order of the Department of Agriculture, all property foreclosures in designated drought regions are suspended pending review. Sheriff Taylor, I have papers for immediate implementation. The timing seemed miraculous, but Leah immediately understood. The reality. Sarah Jenkins had spread word about the newspaper article, perhaps even sent telegrams to the county seat. The federal representatives, already en route to the region, had prioritized areas where distressed foreclosures were being forced through before their arrival. Matheson's face contorted with barely controlled fury as his carefully constructed scheme collapsed around him. The federal authority superseded Judge Brennan's corrupt rulings, the armed show of force now transformed from enforcement to potential criminal intimidation. As the federal agents dismounted, Leah emerged from the house to stand beside Jackson on the porch, shotgun still ready but lowered. Together, they watched Matheson's defeat unfold, his objections overruled, his legal maneuvers nullified, his threats rendered impotent by federal jurisdiction. The battle for Raven Creek ended not with gunfire, but with paperwork, documenting Matheson's pattern of fraudulent foreclosures, recording sworn statements from the captured gunmen, establishing federal protection for properties targeted during the drought crisis. As Matheson and his men retreated toward town, the sheriff remaining behind to coordinate with federal officials, Jackson turned to Leah, the relief in his eyes mingled with something deeper, more personal than mere victory. You stood when others would have fled, he said quietly, defended what wasn't yet yours to claim. Leah set her shotgun aside and reached for her notepad, writing words that would define not just this moment, but their shared future. Sometimes we must fight for what should be, not just what has been. My voice may be silent, but my choice speaks clearly. In that moment, as federal officials secured Raven Creek's immediate safety and messengers departed to recall Nathan, Walter, and Alice from their dangerous journey, Leah Porter stood transformed from voiceless victim to essential defender, a woman who had found not just shelter, but purpose and belonging in the very crisis meant to destroy them all. The drought would eventually end. Raven Creek would flourish, again under skies that finally released their withheld bounty. But the most meaningful change had already occurred, in a silent woman whose worth had finally been recognized, in a divided man who had found unity through defending his inheritance, and in the unexpected family they had forged with an orphaned child, an aging ranch hand, and allies who transcended the boundaries society had tried to enforce upon them all. Leah Porter had arrived with no voice, no family, and no hope. She stood now with all three, her voice expressed through actions more powerful than any words, her family created through bonds stronger than blood, and her hope secured through courage that had revealed her true, immeasurable worth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.